Little girl walked into the office and asked, "Where can I buy a dad?" The Millionaire CEO cried. What followed was a journey no one expected, not him, not her, and certainly not the ghosts of the past still lingering in the corners of his heart. But before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Your stories matter, and we're so glad you're here. Now let's begin. It was a rainy Thursday morning, the kind of morning where the sky seemed unsure of itself, caught somewhere between morning and waiting. The lobby of Rowan Tower was all clean lines and cool marble, a place where time felt sterilized, and the world outside didn't matter. Employees shuffled through security badges, beeping umbrellas, dripping eyes down. No one spoke unless necessary. No one lingered. The building, like the man who owned it, demanded silent speed and precision. At the heart of it all, Elias Rowan stepped through the glass doors like he did every weekday, dressed immaculately in a charcoal gray suit that carried no flair but all the weight of command. He nodded once at the security guard, once at his assistant waiting near the elevator, and was halfway through the polished floor when something made him stop. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. Just a small voice, clear and strange, and completely out of place. "Excuse me," it said. Elias turned slowly, as if doubting his own ears. Near the receptionist desk, where a sleek orchid sat under a soft glow of light, was a girl. She was standing barely as tall as the desk, with a determined expression on her face, and a small hand clutched around the strap of a canvas pouch slung across her chest. She looked to be around 6, though something about her eyes felt older. Her coat was too big, a puffy teal thing that hung past her wrists, and her leggings had tiny patches sewn over the knees in mismatched thread. Her sneakers were worn one lace untied, and her hair was pulled back in a lopsided ponytail that someone had clearly tried their best on. She had freckles across her nose, dirt smudged faintly along one cheek, and a seriousness about her that belonged in a courtroom, not a lobby. Elias blinked. No one else had stopped. The receptionist glanced nervously at him, then at the girl, clearly unsure whether to call security or pretend she hadn't noticed. The girl's voice came again. "Where can I buy a dad?" Her question dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Elias, a man known for his unshakable composure in mergers, crisis calls, and high-stakes medical panels, froze. His mouth opened slightly, closed again. He looked around. A few people paused but hurried on. Most did not even notice. But he had. He could not unhear the words. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "What did you say?" The girl didn't hesitate. She pulled something from the pouch across her chest, a bracelet frayed and bent with a tiny metal charm at its center. The charm was shaped like a bird, wings outstretched. "I think this used to belong to my dad," she said. "I'm trying to find who has the other half. My mom says sometimes people are connected by things even if they don't know it yet." Elias took one cautious step closer, crouching without thinking. The bracelet. He knew that bracelet. Not exactly that one, but something identical. Years ago. It had been his brother James's, a birthday gift, a pair of matching bracelets they had once worn like fools, like dreamers, when the world still felt fixable. James had worn his until the fire. Elias had buried it with him. Or so he thought. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice cracked in a way that made his assistant glance up. The girl looked at him steadily. "It was in the pocket of a coat someone gave us. I fixed the coat, sewed the pocket back on, found this inside. My mom got quiet when she saw it. She said maybe it was a sign." "A sign," he echoed. "To find your dad." "Yes," she said. "So I came here. Your picture is in a folder we found too, with a brochure. I drew it to make sure. It looks like you." She pulled a crumpled drawing from the pouch and unfolded it. It was childish but precise. She had captured his sharp jaw, his blue eyes, the shape of his ears, even the crease between his eyebrows when he was thinking. It was unsettling. It was impossible. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ellie," she said. "Ellie Reyes." The last name slapped him. He remembered it. James had mentioned a girl once. Marin Reyes. Art student. Kind. Brilliant. She had stayed with them during a rough patch. Then she had vanished. That had been nearly 7 years ago. He hadn't thought of her since. "Where's your mother?" he asked, already standing. "At the shelter," Ellie said. She was tired today. She said maybe we'd find something good. I said I'd go look. "By yourself, it's not far." And I had a map. "And I always look both ways." She looked up at him with total calm, like her plan had always included this moment. "You don't have to be scared. I'm not here to steal. I just want to know if maybe—" "You're him." Elias took a breath. He had faced patients in emergency rooms with failing hearts. He had spoken to mourning parents. He had made billion-dollar decisions, but none of that prepared him for the hope in this girl's voice. "Let me take you home," he said, more to himself than her. "Let's go find your mom." His assistant began to protest, phone in hand, but Elias raised a hand. "Reschedule everything." "Sir, everything." He looked at Ellie. "Come on." She reached up and took his hand, small fingers wrapping around his like it had always belonged there. They left the building, past stunned receptionists and puzzled doormen, into the soft mist of the morning rain. In the back seat of his car, Ellie sat with her hands in her lap, watching the streets shift from steel and glass to bricks and fading paint. Elias sat beside her, silent. "You look like him," she said quietly. "Like who, the man in the photo?" "My dad, maybe." "But you're not smiling. Maybe that's just because you forgot how." He didn't reply. He didn't know how. The driver followed her instructions. Elias had never even heard of the street. It was tucked deep into a forgotten part of the city, past boarded stores and flickering streetlights. When the car stopped, Ellie hopped out and led him down a cracked sidewalk to a red brick building with peeling numbers on the door. Inside, the hallway smelled of soup and mildew. A woman in a navy cardigan looked up from a desk, startled. "Ellie," she said. "You're back already. I brought someone," Ellie said. "He wants to meet my mom." The woman looked at Elias and her eyes narrowed slightly. "She's resting." Down the hall, room 12. Elias nodded and followed. The hall was quiet save for the hum of a vending machine and the distant sound of someone crying in another room. Ellie opened the door. "Mom," she called softly. The woman in the bed stirred. She looked up. Her eyes were shadowed, her face thin. But when she saw Elias, she stopped breathing. "Elias," she whispered. "Marin," he said. He took one step in. She sat up, slowly wincing. "You're not supposed to be here." "Your daughter came to my office," he said. "She brought this." He held out the bracelet. Marin looked at it like it had haunted her for years. She found it. She said, "I never meant—" "Is she mine?" Elias asked. Marin closed her eyes. "No," she said. "She's James's, your brother's." The room tilted. Elias sat down on the edge of the bed, unable to speak. Ellie stood in the doorway, quiet and watching. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because you were gone. And James was gone. And I didn't know if you'd want anything to do with us. I should have known. You had your life. You didn't need this pain." Elias looked at Ellie. "She's not pain," he said. "She's a miracle." Marin's voice cracked. "You really think so? I know so." A long silence followed. Then Ellie walked in, climbed onto the bed, and curled into her mother's side. Elias stayed there, seated on the edge, unsure what came next. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of what that might be. The sun had barely risen the next morning when Elias Rowan stood in his kitchen, holding a steaming mug of coffee that had gone cold in his hands. His estate sat on the edge of the city where the streets gave way to woods and hills, and the air felt different out here, softer somehow, as if the noise of the world couldn't quite reach him. Usually that silence had comforted him. Today it felt loud. Upstairs, his bedroom remained untouched, pristine as always. The guest rooms, usually empty, had been prepared the night before by the housekeeper who'd come in early at his request. Fresh linens, warm lighting flowers in a vase. He had given the instructions without quite knowing why. Maybe because he needed something to do with his hands. Maybe because the idea of bringing them here had already rooted in him like a decision long made. After leaving the shelter the day before he had returned home alone, Marin had insisted on staying, said she needed time, said she didn't want to uproot Ellie just because of a conversation they'd barely begun. But when Elias had offered to bring food to have her see the place for herself, she hadn't said no. That had been enough. Now he was waiting. His driver would be picking them up any minute. Elias glanced at the clock but didn't register the time. His mind kept circling back to the same image, Ellie standing in the middle of his lobby, eyes wide, voice steady, asking to buy a dad. The way her fingers had fit so perfectly into his. The way she had seen him not as a millionaire or a CEO or a recluse, but as someone who might belong to her. It shook something in him. He had spent so long building a world where belonging had no place. When the knock finally came, he opened the door himself. Marin stood on the porch holding Ellie's hand. She looked tired, as if the night had been full of questions with no easy answers, but there was a steadiness to her, a quiet resolve. Ellie wore a yellow raincoat with mismatched buttons and carried her pouch over one shoulder like a satchel of tools for some invisible job she had taken upon herself. "We brought muffins," Marin said. She held up a paper bag. "Shelter kitchen made too many this morning. Sister Miriam said it'd be rude not to share." Elias stepped aside without speaking. Marin hesitated before crossing the threshold, eyes scanning the space like she was stepping into a museum she had no ticket for. "You live here alone?" she asked. "I always thought rich people had staff walking around like coat handlers." "I let them go early most days," he said. "I don't like noise." Ellie wandered in and immediately headed for the large window overlooking the garden. "It's like a forest out there," she said. "Do deer come? Sometimes?" Elias replied. "Foxes too." "Can we see them?" "Only if we're quiet," he said. "Foxes don't like noise either." She nodded like that was an agreement she could honor, and sat on the floor cross-legged, her pouch spilling beside her. Marin moved toward the kitchen, setting the muffins on the counter. "This place is beautiful," she said, running a hand along the marble. "Cold, though. You ever light that fireplace once? Last year, it smoked. Figures." Elias watched her from across the room. He remembered her as James's wild-hearted friend, full of color and sharp wit. Time had dulled neither, though. Now she moved like someone used to shrinking into corners, like someone who knew how to disappear before being asked to. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Marin sighed and turned. "Because it was complicated. Because I was grieving. Because James was gone, and I didn't know what you'd say or if you'd accuse me of lying. Because by the time I knew I was pregnant, I was already halfway out of that world." "She's his," Elias said. "No doubt. She looks just like him." "She has your eyes, though, and his stubbornness," Elias added. Marin smiled barely. "Yeah, that too." They sat at the kitchen table without saying more. Ellie wandered in moments later, carrying a crumpled leaf and a stick she claimed looked like a spoon. "I'm making nature soup," she said. "No real water, though. The foxes wouldn't like a mess." Elias nodded solemnly. "That's very considerate." She grinned. "You can help stir later." Elias looked at Marin. "You could stay here. For a while, until things settle. You mean move in temporarily. You'd have privacy, space, better food. She'd have a real bed. I'm not your project, Elias. I'm not offering charity, I'm offering family." That made her pause. She looked at her daughter crouched on the floor, arranging bits of leaf into a small cup. "She deserves stability," Maureen said. "She deserves more than I've been able to give. Then let me help." "And what happens when you decide it's too much? When your fiancé shows up and doesn't want us around?" Elias looked up sharply. "How do you?" "I saw her. On a magazine cover in the shelter. That gala thing last month. You're engaged, right?" He didn't answer right away. "Vivian and I, we're more business than romance. It's complicated. So's this." They were quiet again. Then Marin said, "We'll stay. For a few days. No promises. That's all I ask." Ellie piped up from the floor. "Can I pick my room?" "The one with the purple pillow, please." Elias smiled. Of course. Over the next few hours, the house shifted. It wasn't loud, not exactly, but it began to breathe. Ellie's laughter bounced off the walls as she explored her feet, patting across the hardwood like she'd always belonged there. Marin unpacked a single duffel bag in the guest room, her movements slow, careful as if bracing for someone to tell her to stop. But no one did. That evening, Elias found himself reading a storybook aloud in the living room, while Ellie curled under a blanket, interrupting every few lines to correct his pronunciation of the dragon's name. Marin sat nearby, watching with something close to disbelief. "You're good at this," she said quietly. "I'm learning," Elias replied. Later, after Ellie had fallen asleep in the guest room with her pouch tucked under her pillow, Elias stood outside on the porch staring up at the stars. Marin joined him, wrapping a cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "She thinks you're some kind of hero now," she said. "She's wrong," he replied. "She's 6. She doesn't know enough to be wrong yet." "I don't know how to do this," Elias said. "Family, trust, letting people in." "Neither do I," Maureen admitted. "But maybe we start by not running." "Stay," he said again. "As long as you need. No conditions." She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. The stars were dim above them, but for once Elias didn't feel the usual pull of isolation. Inside the house was no longer quiet in the same way. It was fuller, lived in. And for the first time in years, that didn't scare him. When he finally turned off the lights and went to bed, he passed by the guest room and peeked inside. Ellie was asleep, curled in a ball, the bracelet on her wrist glinting faintly in the moonlight. It didn't matter that it wasn't his, not biologically. It had belonged to James, and James had been everything to Elias once. Losing him had carved something out of Elias that no title, no fortune, no tower of steel and glass had ever filled. But now there was this child, this girl who fixed broken things, who had walked into his life with a question that shattered him. "Where can I buy a dad?" You can't. But you can ask the right person at the right time, and maybe they'll realize they've been waiting to be found too. Elias closed the door softly and walked away, not into silence, but into the beginning of something he didn't yet have a name for. Something like healing. Something like home. The morning after they moved in, the house smelled different. Not the usual faint trace of cedar polish and citrus from the cleaning staff, but something warmer lived in, like cinnamon and worn fabric and childhood. Elias woke earlier than usual, his internal clock still sharp from years of controlling time instead of being part of it. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't move with a purpose. He stayed in bed a moment longer, listening. There were sounds he wasn't used to. Small footsteps, a faint hum. Something clattered, not loudly, but with that distinct rhythm of little hands trying to pour cereal without spilling the entire box. Elias got up, pulled on a sweatshirt, and followed the noise to the kitchen. What he found made him stop in the doorway. Ellie stood on a stool at the counter, her oversized pajama sleeves falling past her wrists, as she carefully attempted to pour milk into a bowl that was already half full of dry oats and what appeared to be jelly beans. Her hair was a mess of soft tangles, and she wore socks with tiny clouds on them that kept slipping down her heels. She turned when she heard him and smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," she said. "I'm making breakfast. For us." Elias stepped in, gently took the milk carton from her precarious grip and helped steady the bowl. "Very kind of you," he said. "You know, this might be a record for the most creative use of jelly beans." "I thought they looked like vitamins," she said earnestly. "They're colorful, and they make me happy. So maybe they'll make you happy too." Marin walked in just then, tying the belt of a worn robe around her waist. Her hair was braided back, and her face looked more rested than it had the night before. She paused at the sight of them and tilted her head. "Well," she said, "looks like you're part of the breakfast committee now." "He is," Ellie said proudly. "Uncle Elias is in charge of pouring. I'm the head chef." Elias glanced at Marin and said with the driest tone he could muster, "And apparently, I've been promoted." Marin chuckled and moved to fill the kettle. "You're doing great, Chef Ellie. What's on the menu besides jelly bean oats toast? But I don't know how to make it pop up without burning." "We can work on that," Elias said. He took a slice of bread and guided her through the process, letting her push the lever on the toaster like it was a mission of national importance. There was something delicate about the moment, something sacred in its ordinariness. A house that had been silent for years now filled with small tasks and shared space. A man who had once measured success in sterile metrics now measuring the time it took to spread jam on toast with a child leaning over the counter beside him. After breakfast, Ellie ran off to her room claiming she needed to reorganize her rock collection, which currently consisted of 3 pebbles and a broken piece of tile she insisted was part of an ancient castle. Marin stayed behind to clear the table. Elias reached for the dishes, but she shook her head. "I've got it. You made toast. That's more than fair trade." He watched her a moment, the way she moved, the way she still hesitated before reaching for something too nice like the crystal water glasses or the handmade ceramic mugs. "You don't have to treat this place like a museum," he said. "It's not." "Force of habit," she replied. "I've lived in a lot of spaces that weren't mine. It's hard to unlearn the reflex. It is yours, for as long as you want it to be." She looked at him, then something unreadable passing through her expression. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. "Guilt." "Partly," Elias admitted, "but not just guilt. I see her. I see James in her, and maybe it's selfish, but being near her feels like getting back a piece of him I thought was gone forever." Marin nodded slowly, then turned back to the dishes. "I just don't want her heart broken. She gets attached easily, and she's already had too much taken away." "So have you," Elias said. She didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed a little, and that was enough. That afternoon, Elias called Grace his assistant and told her he would be working remotely for the foreseeable future. Grace, who had long since stopped pretending to be surprised by his increasingly human behavior, simply asked if she should begin forwarding all non-urgent emails to archive. "Yes," Elias said, "and cancel the quarterly gala appearance. The one Vivian is hosting. Yes, especially that one." There was a pause on the line. Then Grace said, "Understood." He ended the call and sat on the patio with a fresh cup of coffee, watching as Ellie arranged pine cones into a spiral pattern and declared it an invisibility portal for garden gnomes. Marin joined him after a while, her sketchpad in hand. He hadn't seen her draw in years, not since she used to doodle on napkins in their kitchen during college nights when she and James were inseparable. "You're drawing again," he said. "Just trying," she replied. "It's like picking up a language I haven't spoken in years. The grammar's all wrong. It'll come back. Maybe." She turned a page and looked at him. "What about you? Any hobbies?" "I used to paint. Abstract. Mostly terrible. It was James's fault. He bought me a canvas and said, 'Make something that doesn't have numbers in it.'" Marin smiled. "Sounds like him." "He made the world softer," Elias said. "I made it efficient. He balanced me out. And now I feel like a machine running on a human's battery." "Well," she said, "maybe Ellie's got enough battery for all of us." As if on cue, Ellie ran over holding a pine cone proudly. "This one is magic. It told me so." "But it needs a home." "Can it live here?" Elias took it solemnly and set it beside his coffee cup. "Of course, I'll make sure it gets a proper name and everything." "Good," Ellie said. "Magic things need to feel wanted." That night, as the house settled into quiet, Elias walked past Ellie's room and saw her asleep with her arms wrapped around a stuffed animal and her pouch of tools resting beside her pillow. He stood there a moment, watching her chest rise and fall in the rhythmic safety of sleep. Then he went to his study, opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years, and pulled out a box. Inside were photographs, letters, and James's old notebook. He flipped it open and found a note scribbled in the margin of a page about dreams and future plans. "Family is just a bunch of broken people who choose not to give up on each other," it read. Elias closed the notebook, his hands steady. For the first time since James's death, he felt something like peace. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it had found a place to rest. The next morning, Elias made pancakes. He burned the first batch, forgot the salt, and managed to spill syrup on the dog-eared corner of the newspaper. Ellie clapped like it was a performance, and Maren laughed until she coughed. When Elias looked up and saw them both sitting at the table, sunlight catching the curve of Maren's cheek and the wild twist of Ellie's hair, he felt it again, that sensation of being stitched back together from the inside out. And he thought without hesitation that he would burn pancakes every morning for the rest of his life if it meant he could keep this. 3 days after Maureen and Ellie moved into Elias Rowan's estate, a delivery driver arrived at the front gate holding a large white envelope embossed with gold lettering. Elias signed for it absently and walked it to his study, placing it on the desk without opening it. He already knew what it was. Vivian Lee's handwriting was unmistakable, delicate, controlled, sharp enough to wound. He had once admired how cleanly she could navigate a boardroom full of men twice her age without ever raising her voice. Now that same voice echoed in his head like a threat. The envelope sat unopened until the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the floor of the house. When he finally slit the top open with a paper knife, the contents spilled out a formal invitation to the Lee Foundation Winter Gala, a handwritten note from Vivian herself, and a clipped article from a local paper titled "Reclusive CEO Seen at Shelter." Rumors of scandal rise. Elias read the note first. It was brief, as all her messages were. "You're scheduled to speak at the gala next Saturday. I've had your suit tailored. Let's not give the press any more reason to speculate. I expect you at the rehearsal. Vivian." No greeting, no question. Just an expectation, a command, the kind that once would have rolled off his back like mist, but not anymore. Downstairs, the smell of something baking drifted up through the vents. Maren had taken to experimenting in the kitchen, much to Ellie's delight. They had found a recipe book in one of the forgotten cabinets, and Ellie had made it her mission to try every dessert recipe that had a photo. Elias had been roped into being the taste tester, a role he took seriously, even if it meant eating a questionable lime and pretzel tart 2 nights ago that had made him wince behind a polite smile. He left the envelope on his desk and went to find them. In the kitchen, Maren stood barefoot in front of the oven, wearing one of his old button-down shirts over her leggings like a makeshift apron. Flour dusted her cheek, and her hair was pinned up in a messy knot. She looked up when he entered. "Let me guess," she said, "Ellie left her pine cones on your chair again." "No. Though one of them ended up in my shoe this morning." "That means it was chosen," Ellie said from the floor where she was drawing with colored pencils. "Only special shoes get pine cone blessings." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Absolutely." He walked over to the counter and leaned against it. "I got a message today. From Vivian." Maren wiped her hands on a towel and turned, her smile fading. "What does she want?" "She expects me at the gala next week. She's hosting." "And are you going?" Elias hesitated. "I don't know." "Is she your fiancé or your manager?" "Some days I can't tell." Maren nodded and went back to her baking. Ellie looked up. "What's a gala? A party for grown-ups," Elias said. "With fancy clothes and too many speeches. Do they have cake?" "Not the kind you'd like." "Then I'm not going." Elias chuckled, but his thoughts were heavy. That night, after Ellie had gone to sleep and the house was quiet again, Elias and Maren sat on the back porch watching the moon rise over the trees. Maren cradled a mug of tea in her hands. "Are you going to tell her?" she asked. "Tell who what, Vivian?" "About us. About Ellie." "She wouldn't understand." "That's not an answer." "No," Elias said softly. "It's not." Maren looked down into her mug. "You're not the same man I knew before. That man would have already picked out a tuxedo. Maybe I've lost my taste for galas. Or maybe you've found your taste for something better." He glanced at her, like lime and pretzel tart. "Hey, that was Ellie's idea. You let her use mustard in the frosting. It was yellow. She thought it was lemon. It tasted like betrayal." Maren laughed, a full sound that filled the night air and made something loosen in Elias's chest. He hadn't heard that sound in years. He had forgotten how much he missed it. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked after a long pause. "James." Elias nodded. "Every day, even when I don't want to. He's there, in everything. She looks so much like him." and yet she's entirely herself. He would have adored her. He would have adored you for raising her. Marin looked away. I didn't do it alone. Sister Miriam helped. Friends at the shelter. People who had less than me but gave more. I just tried to keep her safe. You did more than that. Marin didn't respond. They sat in silence a while longer until the wind grew colder and they both stood to go inside. The next morning, Elias found Ellie sitting at the kitchen table, her head bent over a piece of paper. She looked up when he entered and held it out. For your office, she said. He took it carefully. It was a drawing of the three of them. He stood on one side holding a giant spoon. Marin stood on the other wearing a crown made of flowers. Ellie was in the middle holding both their hands. Above them was a speech bubble that read, "We fix things." Elias looked down at her. This is beautiful. You can put it next to your computer. So you don't forget. Forget what? That we're your real job now. He folded the paper with care and tucked it into his jacket. I won't forget. That afternoon he sent a message to Grace. Cancel my appearance at the gala, he wrote. I have other priorities. The response came swiftly. Vivian will not be pleased. Elias typed back, she'll survive. Then he turned off his phone. That night, while Marin read Ellie a bedtime story, Elias sat in his study looking at the unopened invitation still sitting on his desk. He picked it up, walked to the fireplace, and fed it into the flames. The paper curled and blackened, and with it something else burned away too. An old allegiance. A version of himself that had been curated for public consumption. In its place, something quieter settled. Something real. Upstairs, Ellie's laughter echoed down the hallway. Marin's voice followed soft and warm. Elias closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he didn't feel like he was waiting for his life to begin. It had already started. He just had to keep choosing it. Every day, every small sacred moment. And that he realized was the kind of commitment no gala could ever replace. Elias Rowan hadn't stepped inside the Lee Foundation headquarters in nearly 4 years, and for good reason. The walls were too clean, the lights too white. Everything about the building felt like it had been scrubbed of warmth, bleached of memory, polished to reflect nothing but ambition. But that morning he stood in the parking garage, leaning against the passenger door of his car, watching the glass entrance with narrowed eyes. He hadn't come for Vivian. He had come because of what he heard from Grace. Whispers. A phone call accidentally forwarded. A casual line spoken in the hallway and caught by someone loyal. Something was shifting. Vivian had learned about Marin and Ellie. Not from him. From someone else. And the way she was positioning it to the board, to potential donors, even to the press, was not out of concern but strategy. Elias walked through the lobby, nodding at the receptionist, who froze mid-sentence when she saw him. He made no announcements, no appointments. He took the elevator straight up to the top floor where the Foundation's executive offices stretched like a glass kingdom in the sky. Vivian's assistant blinked when he stepped out of the lift. Mr. Rowan, she said, rising quickly. Miss Lee is... I know where she is, Elias said, brushing past her. He opened the door to Vivian's office without knocking. Vivian Lee stood near the window phone to her ear, her posture so straight it could have cut glass. She turned slowly at the sound of the door, her expression tightening only a fraction. I'll call you back, she said into the phone, then hung up. I must say Elias' dramatic entrances suit you, though I thought you were far too busy working remotely these days. Cut the theater, Elias said, closing the door behind him. You've been digging into Marin, into Ellie. Vivian's expression remained serene. You mean the woman and child living in your house, the ones whose photos were conveniently leaked to the shelter's donation newsletter? You should know better. Everything leaks eventually. You're trying to use them. I'm trying to protect the Foundation. Your behavior has become erratic. You're skipping galas, ignoring speaking engagements, and now you're cohabiting with a single mother and a child no one knew existed until last week. If I don't get ahead of the narrative, someone else will. Elias crossed the room slowly. Ellie is not a narrative. She's family. Vivian blinked. Whose family? Elias stared at her, something cold passing between them. James's daughter. Vivian said nothing for a moment. Then she stepped back from the desk and walked around to sit in her chair. Well, she said, after a long pause, that's quite the revelation. And let me guess, you only recently found out, yes, and yet you moved them into your home before a single article dropped. That's unlike you. Maybe I'm done being like me. Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. You always had a weakness for lost causes, Elias. Your brother, your charities. Now this. Don't. Don't what? Don't talk about James like that. He was 10 times the man I ever was. And Ellie, she's everything that's good about him. Vivian folded her hands. So, what is it you want from me? A vow of silence or a public endorsement of your sudden transformation into a doting father figure? Elias leaned over the desk slightly. I want you to stay away from them. No stories, no press releases, no more boardroom gossip. You come near them again, I'll make sure your next fundraiser is held in a broom closet. Vivian arched an eyebrow. Is that a threat? No, Elias said, straightening. It's a promise. He turned to leave, then paused with his hand on the doorknob. And Vivian, if you ever cared about James even a little, leave his daughter out of your games. She didn't reply, but he didn't wait for one. He returned home that evening to find Marin and Ellie in the garden. Ellie was wearing rain boots 3 sizes too big and jumping between puddles like they were sacred stepping stones. Marin sat on a bench nearby sketchpad in her lap, a quiet smile on her lips. Elias watched them for a moment before stepping outside. Ellie spotted him first. Uncle Elias, she called, running over and hugging his legs. We planted daffodils. They're going to come up in the spring. And I named each bulb. That one's Sir Wiggle, and that one is Lady Bloom. Elias knelt to her level. Excellent choices. May they both grow strong. She beamed and ran off again. Marin looked up as he approached. You're late. Had to take care of something. Vivian. She knows. But I made it clear. She stays away or she's done. Marin's smile faded. That won't stop her. She doesn't lose. She already has. She just doesn't know it yet. Marin searched his face. Why are you doing this, Elias? Because for the first time in my life, I'm building something that matters. You mean her, you, us. Whatever this is, it's real. And I don't want to lose it. Even if it means stepping away from everything you've built, I'd rather build something worth staying for. Marin looked down, blinking quickly. Then she reached for his hand. You don't have to fix everything you know. Sometimes it's enough just to be here. I know. But maybe I want to be the kind of man who tries. That night, after Ellie had fallen asleep, Elias walked into his office and stared at the picture she had drawn him. He had pinned it to the wall above his desk. Every time he looked at it, he felt something unfamiliar, something like hope. He opened a new file on his computer, drafted a letter to the board of the Lee Foundation. In it, he stated that he was stepping down from his position effective immediately, that he would no longer attend public events nor serve as the face of any campaign he did not fully endorse. Then he clicked save and sent it. The next morning, Grace called him in disbelief. You're resigning, she asked. From the board, not from life. You know what this means. It means I have time to learn how to make pancakes without burning them. You burned them again. Yes, but I'm getting better. Grace sighed, but there was a smile in her voice. I'll start transferring everything. Thank you. That day, Elias stayed home. He helped Ellie build a pillow fort. He watched Marin's sketch by the window, and when the sun dipped below the hills, he found himself humming a song James used to play on the piano when they were young. For the first time in years, the house felt like a home. He had once believed that purpose was tied to power, that legacy meant leaving your name on buildings and foundations. But as Ellie curled up beside him on the couch whispering that she wanted to dream of daffodils and jellybean stars, Elias realized that legacy wasn't what you built for others to remember you by. It was what you built with the people who would never forget you. And this quiet, chaotic, beautiful life was the beginning of everything he never knew he needed. Winter came early that year. The wind curled tighter through the trees and frost dusted the window panes of the Rowan estate like icing sugar left by invisible hands. Elias stood in the kitchen at dawn, coffee in hand, watching as the first snow of the season fell in slow spirals outside. It had been nearly 3 weeks since he sent that resignation letter to the Lee Foundation. 3 weeks since the phone stopped ringing with donor demands, since his calendar was cleared of speeches, interviews, fundraisers, and stiff gala rehearsals. Silence had once terrified him. Now it felt like peace. Down the hallway, small feet patted against hardwood. Ellie appeared in the doorway wearing a red sweater covered in tiny gold stars and pajama pants that didn't match. Her hair was a wild tangle of curls that framed her face like a lion's mane. She rubbed her eyes and looked up at him. "It snowed," she said sleepily. Elias nodded. "First of the season. Does that mean the garden is sleeping?" "Yes. Everything under the snow is resting, waiting to bloom again." She climbed onto the stool beside him and leaned her cheek against his arm. "Do you think daffodils dream? Of course. Probably of spring. Do you?" Elias smiled. "I think I've just started." Marin joined them not long after, wrapped in a blanket, her voice still rough with sleep. The three of them made cinnamon toast and hot chocolate. They sat in the sunroom watching the snow fall as the world softened around them. Later that day, while Ellie built a snow fort in the backyard, Marin pulled Elias aside. "We need to talk," she said. Her tone was quiet but serious. He followed her to the library where they could speak without little ears nearby. Marin held out an envelope. "What is this?" he asked. "Ellie's birth certificate. The original?" "I had Sister Miriam mail it to me from the shelter archives." Elias took it carefully. The paper was faded, the edges curled. But the name printed on it was clear. Eleanor Grace Rowan, Mother Marin Lee, Father James Rowan. Elias felt something heavy twist in his chest. "You never changed it," he said. "Never hid it. I couldn't." James signed it himself the day she was born. "Even after everything that happened, I wanted her to know where she came from, who she belonged to. And you never told me. Would you have listened?" Elias looked down. "Probably not. You were drowning in grief, in legacy. You weren't ready, and I wasn't strong enough to make you see it then. But I see it now." "Do you?" Marin stepped closer. "Elias, you're doing everything right. You've stepped up in ways I never expected. But Ellie, she's asking questions. About her dad, about James, about what really happened, and I think she needs to know." Elias swallowed. "She's still so young. She's old enough to wonder. And if we don't tell her the truth, someone else will. I don't want that truth twisted by tabloids or whispered through rumors. I want her to hear it from the people who love her most." Elias nodded slowly. "Then we'll tell her. Together." That evening after dinner, they sat on the couch in the living room. Ellie was sandwiched between them, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had once belonged to her father. Elias turned off the television and looked down at her. "Ellie," he said gently, "we want to talk to you about something important." She blinked up at him. "Am I in trouble?" "No, not at all. We just want to share something about your dad." "My real dad." Marin took her hand. "You remember how we told you he loved you very much, even though he had to leave?" Ellie nodded. "His name was James," Elias said. "He was my little brother." Her eyes widened. "So you're my uncle?" "For real, yes. And I didn't know about you for a long time. But now that I do, I want to be here for you. Always." "What happened to him?" Her voice was small. Marin looked at Elias, who nodded. "Your dad got very sick," she said softly. "And the doctors couldn't make him better. He passed away just before you were born." Ellie clutched the rabbit tighter. "That's why I don't remember him." "But he saw you, sweetie," Marin said, brushing back a curl from her forehead. "He held you in his arms. He whispered your name. He told you he loved you." Ellie was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Elias. "Do you think he'd like that? I picked you?" Elias felt his throat tighten. "I think he'd be proud of both of us." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then I picked right." Outside, the snow kept falling. Quiet. unstoppable, covering the earth in a clean white sheet like a promise. Over the next week, Elias began making changes. He called his lawyers and rewrote his will. He added Ellie's name to the estate trust. He called Grace and asked her to start looking into safe ways to transition the remaining shelter funds into an independent foundation, one not connected to the Lee brand. And he hired a team to begin renovating one of the unused wings of the estate. A learning space, he called it. Not a school, not a program. Just a place where children like Ellie could come, read books, paint walls, plant things, and feel like the world wasn't just something they had to survive. Marin watched all this with cautious hope. "You're building again," she said one night, watching blueprints cover the kitchen table. "Not for show, not for shareholders. For us. For her." Elias looked up. "For James, too. He'd be proud of you. I hope so. I know so." Just as the final week of December approached with the holidays looming like soft stars on the horizon, Elias received a call from Grace. Her voice was tense. "Vivian's been talking to the press." "What kind of talking enough to draw attention?" "There's a reporter asking questions. Apparently someone at the foundation leaked that you've been harboring your brother's child, that you've been manipulating shelter funds. They're painting it like a scandal." "Of course they are. It's not just gossip this time. There's pressure on the board. Some are considering legal investigation into the foundation's prior distributions. Let them investigate. I've been clean. And if Vivian wants a war, she picked the wrong battlefield." Grace sighed. "You sure you're ready for this?" Elias looked out the window where Ellie was dancing in the snow again, wearing a paper crown she made from old wrapping paper. "I'm not just ready," he said. "I've been waiting my whole life to fight for something that matters." He hung up, walked outside, and lifted Ellie into the air, spinning her once, her laughter ringing through the air like bells. "Dad," she said without thinking, then froze. Elias set her down gently. "Say that again." She looked up shyly. "Sorry, I meant—" "No," he said softly, kneeling down. "You don't have to apologize. You can call me whatever feels right. Can I call you Dad?" "Yes. Always." She wrapped her arms around his neck, and Elias held her close. Marin watched from the porch, hand over her mouth, heart pounding. This was not the life she imagined. It was better, stronger, built not from perfection but from pieces made whole again by love. And as snow continued to fall around them, soft and endless, it felt like the beginning of something forever. The storm came quietly overnight, draping the city in layers of white that muffled tires and silenced footsteps. By morning, the world outside the Rowan estate was almost dreamlike. It was the sort of snowfall that made children beg for sleds and grown-ups pray their cars would start. Inside the house, however, warmth hummed like a second heartbeat. Marin was sitting by the fireplace reading a worn novel whose spine had long since cracked while Elias sat at the piano, his fingers drifting idly over the keys. He was not playing anything real, just stringing notes together like thoughts he could not say aloud. Ellie was sprawled on the rug with her coloring books occasionally humming along, her voice soft and sure. For a moment the piece was whole. Then the doorbell rang. Elias's hand froze mid-chord. He glanced toward the window, already suspecting who it might be. When he opened the door, his guess was confirmed. Vivian Mathers stood on the steps, wrapped in a coat that looked more expensive than sensible, flanked by two men in gray suits. She did not wait for an invitation. "We need to talk," she said. Elias stepped aside. Vivian walked in like she still owned the place, pausing only when she caught sight of Marin, who had risen from the chair with cautious calm. Vivian Marin said coolly, "You remember the warmth of hospitality. How nostalgic." Vivian's smile was tight. "I did not come to banter. This isn't personal. Of course not. You just brought lawyers to a living room." Elias shut the door and turned. "Say what you came to say." Vivian pulled a folder from her bag. "The Foundation Board is voting to sever all ties with you by the end of the quarter. Your personal accounts are under preliminary audit, and you're being named in a civil claim for misuse of charitable funds. False, and you know it. Perception is reality, Elias. You of all people should understand that. What I understand," he said, walking toward her, "is that this is your last grasp at relevance. You lost control of the narrative. You lost your grip on the board. And you're scrambling. You're protecting a child who is not yours. You concealed her from the foundation. You funneled funds to shelters where her mother worked. It reeks of nepotism. That child is my family. And I would rather lose every cent than let her be dragged through your theater. Vivian's face tightened. You think this ends with moral superiority? There will be headlines, investigations. You'll go down with the name you're so desperate to redeem. Marin stepped forward. Vivian, this little campaign of yours won't bring you peace. Elias stepped back from the foundation so children like Ellie could be protected without boardroom politics. What are you fighting for? Your ego. Your quarterly bonuses. I'm fighting for order, Vivian snapped, for accountability. Then hold yourself accountable. You let a dozen shelters close while you negotiated contracts for branded tote bags. You buried reports about abuse in the Northern District Center because they would have hurt the Foundation's media rollout. Elias turned to the lawyers. I suggest you check your facts before you follow her off this cliff. I have records. So do Grace and a dozen former staff members willing to testify. If Vivian wants a public reckoning, I'm ready. Vivian stared at him for a long moment, then reached into her coat and pulled out another envelope. Then, consider this your final notice. She placed it on the piano, turned and walked out the door without another word. The men in suits hesitated, then followed. The silence that followed was thick. Elias picked up the envelope but did not open it. Do you think she'll stop? Marin asked quietly. No, not until she destroys what she thinks I took from her. The problem is I never wanted what she had. What will you do now? Fight smart. Not loud. Grace will help. We'll release a statement. I'll gather the documents she thinks I buried. But most of all, I'll protect Ellie. That is not negotiable. Over the next few days, the house filled with a strange kind of energy. It was not fear exactly, more like resolve. Marin began organizing all the paperwork they had kept over the years. Letters James had written, photos of Ellie's birth, donation records, shelter receipts. Elias reached out to old colleagues and board members who still believed in what the foundation was supposed to be. And Ellie kept asking questions. Why did that lady look so angry? She asked one night as Marin tucked her in. Because some people don't like when others find happiness without their permission, Marin answered gently. Is she going to take Dad away? No, baby, she's just loud. But your dad is strong, and he loves you. That's what matters. Even if I wasn't his first choice. Marin paused. Where did you hear that I heard her? In the hallway. She said I wasn't really his, that he's pretending. Marin sat beside her and held her hand. That woman doesn't know your story. She only sees what she wants to see. Your dad didn't know about you for a long time, but when he found you, he chose you. Completely. And that choice is real, every single day. Ellie nodded slowly. I believe you. That weekend, Elias took Ellie to visit the old community center where her mother used to volunteer. The building was mostly empty now, the programs long defunded, but the walls still carried echoes of laughter and art. Ellie found a mural in the back room. It was faded and cracked, but the outline of a field of dandelions remained. I remember this, she said. Mom painted it. She did, Elias said softly. She wanted kids to have something beautiful to look at, something that felt like hope. Ellie touched one of the painted flowers. Can we fix it? I think we should. That night, Elias made a decision. He gathered Marin and Ellie in the study and laid out his plan. I'm going to rebuild the center, he said. Not as a charity, as a place that belongs to this community. No brands, no sponsors, just purpose. It will be in James's name. And Ellie's. Marin stared at him. That will stir the hornet's nest. Let it sting. The foundation can keep their politics. We'll build something they can't touch. What about the lawsuit? Let them come. I'll face them with truth. Marin took his hand. Then we'll stand beside you. And so they did. In the following weeks, blueprints were drawn, permits were filed. Artists volunteered to restore the mural. Local teachers donated books and supplies. Word spread, and with it came support. Quiet at first, then louder. Former shelter staff began speaking out. Families stepped forward to share stories of how Elias's silent donations had kept them afloat during impossible times. And in the middle of it all, Ellie painted. She painted butterflies and bridges, stars and rivers, her small hands splashing color across paper like she was stitching the world together again. One day, as snow melted into slush and the first signs of spring whispered from the soil, a letter arrived in the mail. Not from lawyers or reporters, but from one of the children Elias had once helped anonymously, a boy now grown. In his letter he wrote, "You gave me food when I hadn't eaten for 2 days. You gave my sister a coat. You didn't ask for thanks, you just showed up. Now I'm in college, and I want you to know your quiet love changed everything." Elias read it aloud, his voice cracking. Ellie climbed into his lap and whispered, "I told you. You're someone's dad." And for the first time in a long time, Elias let himself cry. Not from grief, but from grace. From the fragile, fearless love that had found him in the form of a little girl who once asked where she could buy a dad, and instead brought him back to life. Act 2. The grand opening of the Whitaker Center arrived on a morning touched with sunlight and petals of early spring, drifting across the sidewalks like forgotten confetti. The restored mural greeted every guest who entered the courtyard, a sea of dandelions and soaring birds now repainted with brighter colors and lined in gold by Ellie's own careful hand. She had signed her name in the bottom corner right beside her mother's original signature. That morning, Elias woke early, standing in the doorway of Ellie's room, as she pulled on the little blue dress Marin had helped her pick out. Her hair was tied back with a ribbon the same color as the mural sky. When she noticed him watching, she smiled and said, "Ready to cut the ribbon, Dad." The word still jolted something deep in his chest every time. A word he never thought would belong to him now, spoken with the casual grace of someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself. He nodded and whispered, "More than ready." Outside, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors, former shelter staff, volunteers, teachers, and even reporters, though not the kind who hunted for scandal. These ones came because something different had happened here, something unpurchased. At the edge of the gathering, Vivian Mathers stood in a gray coat expression, unreadable. She had not tried to shut them down since the last letter, but her presence today was a signal, not a warning, a concession. Elias stepped onto the small makeshift stage with Ellie and Marin beside him. He looked out at the people at the building, now lined with open bookshelves and art rooms and laughter already echoing inside, and he exhaled a breath he had been holding for years. This place was built with quiet kindness, he began, voice steady, with donations that did not make headlines and with hands that never asked for recognition. It was built for people like my brother James, who lived without the support he deserved, and for children like Ellie, who remind us that love is not measured in DNA but in how fiercely we choose one another. A murmur passed through the crowd as Ellie smiled and clutched his hand. "We chose each other," she whispered up to him. "Yes, we did," Elias whispered back. "This center is not about saving anyone. It is about restoring dignity. It is about giving back what the world sometimes tries to steal: hope, safety, belonging. I am not a perfect man, but I have learned that love is not a transaction. It is a promise, and I intend to keep mine." With that, Ellie reached out and cut the ribbon with golden scissors, almost too large for her hands. The crowd erupted in applause, as people began to stream into the center for tours and coffee and hugs. Elias stepped down into the courtyard. Vivian approached him slowly. Her coat flapped gently in the breeze, her heels crunching softly on gravel. "You did it," she said simply. "You did not stop me," he replied. "You had every chance." "I lost the board," she said. Not with bitterness, but something like clarity. "But I see now that I never really had them. I had fear. You had faith." Elias did not gloat. He only nodded. "There's still time to do good, Vivian. Just not like this. Are you forgiving me?" "No." But I am letting go, because I need my hands free for the people who are still holding on. She nodded once, then turned and left without further words. That evening, long after the last camera had been packed away and the courtyard cleaned of folding chairs and empty cups, Elias sat in the art room beside Ellie watching her paint. "This is the new mural," she said. "What is it?" he asked. "It is the inside of our house, the part people cannot see, the place where we keep our real stories. And what does it look like?" She pointed to a swirl of blues and golds, like love you did not expect but could not forget. He kissed the top of her head. Marin stepped in, then holding a letter. "You need to see this," she said. Elias opened it carefully. The envelope was thick, embossed with the seal of the state. Inside was the official notice that Ellie's legal guardianship was complete. No longer provisional, no longer contested. She was his, forever. He looked at Marin, then at Ellie. "Want to read it?" he asked her. She took the letter in her hands and read the words slowly, mouthing them like she was tasting each syllable. "It says I am not a maybe anymore," she said. "It says I belong." The next day, they went to visit Sarah's grave together. Elias had waited until the guardianship was final. He wanted Sarah to know that Ellie was not only safe, but cherished. The cemetery was quiet. Birds sang low. The headstone had been cleaned recently. Someone had left a small bouquet of wildflowers. Ellie knelt and touched the stone. "Hi, Mama," she whispered. "I miss you. But I have stories now. Dad tells me one every night. And he makes up voices for all the animals." Elias stood behind her, silent, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I did not find her by accident," he said quietly. "She found me, when I had stopped looking for anyone, and now I cannot imagine a world without her." Ellie looked up at him. "Can I tell her the joke about the chicken and the telescope? I think she would love that." And so she did. That summer, the Whitaker Center became something more than a community hub. It became a place of reunion. Children who had been separated found each other again through its programs. Teachers who had given up on the system found reasons to return. Even Elias found parts of himself he thought had died long ago. Laughter that came easy, forgiveness that came slow but real, and the quiet joy of hearing someone call your name not because of what you built, but because of who you chose to be. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft purples and silver, Ellie and Elias stood on the roof of the center watching the stars appear. "Do you think Mom is one of the stars?" Ellie asked. "I think she's the wind that carries the stars so they never fall," he said. "Then she's really strong." She always was. Ellie leaned her head against his side. "Do you think someday other kids will come here and find their dads? Maybe not the ones they were born to, but maybe the ones they were meant to have, like you, like me?" Silence fell again, but it was the kind that wrapped around them like a blanket, full of stories yet to be told and days still to be lived, and somewhere far above or deep within the stars kept moving, just like love, quiet, unstoppable, eternal. And that was the story of a little girl who walked into an office asking to buy a dad and ended up changing a man's life forever. If you made it this far, take a deep breath. Was it the moment she held out the bracelet or the final words at the rooftop that broke you? Let us know in the comments where in the world are you watching from. And if stories like this remind you that love isn't always loud, but it's always powerful, then don't forget to subscribe for more tales that heal surprise and stay with you long after the screen fades, because sometimes all it takes is one sentence to change everything.